Reggie, something in this lesson reminded me of a different passage in 1 Corinthians. Paul encouraged the believers there that for the sake of other Christians, they should lay aside their liberties to not eat meat, to not participate in some things that they were free to do. Whereas in this book, Paul seems to tell Christians that they should go ahead and taste and touch, and that it was important for them to do so. Is Paul talking out of both sides of his mouth here, or is there an underlying truth that we should see?
Chris, that's a great observation. It so happens that there are different sicknesses that call for different medications. And it's important to know where people are and what part of the gospel truth they need to hear. And sometimes it's going to sound really different. The Corinthians, and here's where I think that the already not yet configuration that we've talked about in these lessons is exceedingly helpful. The Corinthians thought that they had arrived. They thought they were king's kids. They thought that they could just enjoy every aspect of the eschaton, the arrival. And what they were doing was exercising their liberties at one another's expense. And they were leaving unattended problems of pride and lovelessness. And Paul said it's important for you all to understand that you need to keep God's commandments, and you need to not go beyond what is written. So yeah, he was reeling them in. And I think it's because they thought that they were in a resurrection state where they could write their own rules. The Colossians are at a different place. They did not yet understand how much Christ's death and resurrection had benefited them. They needed to know more about the already. The Corinthians needed to be reminded that there was a not yet. They have not yet arrived, and therefore the obligation to keep the commandments and especially to love one another and to defer to one another was still in play. In the case of the Colossians, they, like the Galatians, were not appreciating how much had already been done for them on the cross and in the resurrection of Jesus and in his presence among them. So they were being cowered into offering obeisance and veneration to gods that were not gods. And they were being told to, okay, if you want to deal with your flesh, well, then you need to do this and you need to do that. And instead, they needed to be pointed to Christ, in whom there is wisdom, in whom there is forgiveness. They need to be aware of the way that Christ he was the circumcision of the human race. His blood had been shed so that their sins could be forgiven. And he had been raised, and they have life in him, and they have been joined to all Jews and Gentiles, males and females, slaves and free, who belong to him and are being shaped and refashioned, and so to bear his image. So they needed to be alerted to the value of the already. The Corinthians needed to be reminded that we're not yet there.